the statement that I wish to make today, and some of you may not have gotten it. So I wish you will grant me some indulgence to read that statement, and then I will try to answer any questions you may have. Due to the resurgent Delta variant and the need to give some states more time to deliver federal rental assistance funds, I am joining my colleagues in House Democratic leadership, calling on the Biden administration to extend the CDC eviction moratorium into October. Studies show that evictions increase the spread of the coronavirus, infections, and deaths. With the increasing cases caused by the Delta variant, the CDC should extend the eviction moratorium to protect public health. Congress has appropriated over $46 billion in rental assistance funds to keep people in their homes. But many state and local governments say they need more time to disperse those funds to landlords and renters. By June 30th, only $3 billion of the $46 billion had been dispersed. But extending the moratorium is not all that is needed. Some state and local governments have been setting up rental assistance programs from scratch. According to the Census Bureau, as of June 21st, or June 2021, 7.8 million people were behind in their rent. The economic crisis caused by the pandemic has caused great hardship. In some states, it has disproportionately impacted communities of color and made many rentals vulnerable to eviction. As of June 30th, South Carolina had dispersed almost none of the $500 million in rental assistance allocated for the state. Almost none of $500 million of that $46 billion has been allocated to South Carolina, and they have not dispersed the money. Florida has only dispersed $1.5 million of the $1.6 billion that's been allocated for that state. In Georgia, they've dispersed only $8.4 million of the $1 billion that's been allocated for Georgia. Sadly, certain large corporate landlords have taken advantage of families during this time, and the select subcommittee that I chair is investigating this. In July, I sent letters to Premium Partners, Invitation Homes, Venture Management, and the Siegel Group to determine whether they are cooperating with rental assistance programs to avoid evictions and whether they have complied with the CDC eviction moratorium. These companies together have filed for at least 5,000 evictions during the pandemic. In addition to extending the moratorium, we must hold bad corporate landlords accountable. I urge them to work with tenants to access federal rental assistance funds as an alternative to eviction. Some states and localities have dispersed funds relatively well, including Virginia, having dispersed $220 million, Texas, $616 million, Illinois, $172 million, Massachusetts, $118 million, and Houston Harris County, Texas, one county, $137 million. Cook County in Illinois, $39 million. The success of these states shows that slow distributing states can dramatically improve. And I'm now reminded as I close of a statement I read, I think it was in a court decision some time ago. And it said that nothing speaks louder than numbers, and no number speaks louder than zero. And that's pretty much where South Carolina is when it comes to getting this money out. So no matter how much money we disperse from Washington, no matter how long people have, if they don't send the money out the door like they should to the landlords and to the renters, it doesn't matter how long it is. People are clamoring all over about extending the moratorium. It's time for us to ask these states to get the money already appropriated and dispersed out to the people who are deserving of them. And with that, I'll answer the questions.
Thank you, Congressman. We will now open up the floor for questions. As a friendly reminder, please use the raise hand feature or the chat function to indicate that you have a question, and I will call on you. You may then unmute and ask your question. Up first, we have Thomas Novelli. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Congressman, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. To start out, taking a look at South Carolina as it relates to this rental epidemic, there are 28% of renters that are behind as of the first week of July, according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Like you said, the money does exist there and very little of it has been dispersed. What do you attribute that lack of distribution to? Is it just that local governments are overwhelmed, or do you also believe it stems from just a lack of advertising and South Carolinians not aware that these resources exist? What do you attribute that to?
I wish I knew. I have been calling upon South Carolina for some time now to get the money out. When I was first made aware of the fact that the money was not being distributed. And I'm particularly incensed by this because the South Carolina Housing and Research Authority and Finance Authority, I believe is what the new name is. When I went to work for John West was inaugurated governor in January 1971. I had been doing housing stuff in rural South Carolina. I came to John West's attention. I'll never forget the date, August 16, 1969. I met with him at 11 o'clock that morning. And the reason I don't ever forget that date, because my second daughter, Jennifer, was born at 8:30 that morning. And I left my wife's bedside to meet with John West. And we were talking about housing. And he asked me that if he got elected governor, would I join his staff because he was interested in what I was doing with housing. And out of that conversation grew what is now the South Carolina Housing and Finance Authority. And I understand they're the ones that are supposed to be getting this money out. And why that money is not out, I do not know. Now, just to complete the history on this, when we created that authority, Grady Patterson, who was the treasurer at the time, sued the governor and won. And we had to go back to the legislature and do more work, and went back to Supreme Court. The second time, the South Carolina Supreme Court ruled against us again. We redid the legislation and then went back. And the third time around, the Supreme Court approved what we were doing. I just give you that little history to let you know how vested I feel in housing and how I think we ought to be doing better. It makes no sense to me that here in South Carolina, we're sitting on $500 million and people are about to have their furniture put out on the streets. I don't know if you've ever seen or passed a house where someone has been evicted and you see all their belongings out on the lawn, sometimes out on the street, where passers-by just come and take their stuff. And people are gonna have to start all over and then go live in a shelter and then run the risk of getting COVID-19 and spreading it throughout the community. This is not a good look for any state, and really not a good look for my home state.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, up next, we have Meg Kennard. You may unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you
Hello.
for doing this. Hello. I wanted to ask you this whole falderall over what to do with the eviction moratorium has caused kind of a, I don't want to say last minute because it's been known that this was going to be happening, but somewhat of a late breaking complication between congressional Democrats and the Biden administration. What do you see as the next step for you, the Black Caucus, Speaker Pelosi, all of the congressional Democrats who are calling on the administration for this extension? If it doesn't come, do you think that's going to create further complications for other pieces of agenda items that you all may be working on? And what do you do with this evictions issue if that extension doesn't happen?
Well, there are two things here. We keep talking about the extension. And what I've been trying to say is that I don't think that's the real problem. No matter how far out, you can extend this thing to next year this time. If that $500 million that's sitting here in Columbia is still sitting there, the extension will not do any good, though we are asking for this extension to go until October 18th. And the reason we did that was to line this extension up with other relevant issues at Health and Human Services. The termination date for that is October 18th. And we were asking that it just line up. And so I'm going to ask the Biden administration once again to take a look at HHS's issue and see whether or not we can line this extension up with that, to keep it uniform and to give a little more time. There may be that South Carolina and other states have not been able to develop the mechanism that's necessary to get the money out. I did see a news report coming out of Mississippi where a mother with children, a single mother with children, was talking about the forms they had to fill out. Just keep filling out the forms. You know, I've been around this business a long time. And there are a lot of things that can be streamlined. If you got somebody sitting there, the rent's due, work out a mechanism so that the money will get to the landlord. And it seems to me that the states can keep people in their homes by moving money directly to the landlords. Work out a procedure that says the money goes to the landlords. If the person can sit there and say, well, I don't feel like filling out all these forms. I don't know how to fill out all these forms, but I do owe this money. And this is my landlord that I owe this money to. I would love to stay here in this apartment. Please give the money straight to the landlord. What would it take if we put some of this burden on the landlords to fill out these forms? They're the ones that are the sophisticated ones, especially these four that I just wrote the letters to, because we think something else is taking place. I would not be conducting this investigation if I thought that this was all on the up and up. I think there's something else going on here, and we plan to get to the bottom of it.
Do you think that complication that you're going to be investigating is rooted in politics or something more nefarious?
I think there's something more nefarious than just politics. Something much more nefarious. They may be supported by politicians, but look, I mean, you've got somebody that's refusing to give assistance to the people who are trying to stay in their homes. Why is that? When you're going to get the money goes to the landlords. So if you got $500 million sitting here in Columbia that's going to the landlords who own the property, and the money's not getting to the landlords, And the landlords are putting pressure on the tenants and putting them out on the street. When the state of South Carolina, with all these sophisticated people sitting over there in the state office buildings, they got the paperwork and they got the money. So tell me, that's why I think there's something nefarious going on. Remember, before I went to Congress, I spent 4 years in the governor's office and spent 18 years running a state agency. And then that's 22 years I was in state government. So I know a whole lot about state government, and running the Human Affairs Commission taught me a whole lot about how nefarious activity taking place, especially when here in South Carolina and many other states, there is a disproportionate amount of evictions happening to people of color.
Congressman, I just have one more follow-up. I promise I'm not going to bogart all of this. But some of the progressive members of the Democratic Party, including Representative Cori Bush, have been protesting at the Capitol, even camping out overnight. What is your reaction to those members taking that kind of action in wake of all this?
I'm very sensitive to protesting. If you recall, I met my wife in jail protesting. I've been a protester all of my life, and I'm still protesting. I'm protesting right now as to why South Carolina is not getting this money out of the door. So I'm sensitive to what Cori Bush and others are trying to bring attention to. I'm just trying to see what I can do to get the Biden administration, CDC, the Treasury Department, all on the same page, all rowing in this boat together, in order to keep people in their homes and get landlords paid for their investments. Look, these landlords have got mortgages to pay. And some of these landlords own, say, 2 and 3 units and that sort of stuff. And some of them, this is their retirement. That's how they supplement their Social Security with the income from these units. And they are deserving of better treatment than they are getting. But it's not the federal government that's doing it. If you've appropriated $46 billion for the country and only $3 billion has been used, then that's not the Congress redundant. It's on whoever's got the money tied up.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, up next we have Mario Parker. You may unmute and ask your question.
Thanks a lot, Congressman, for holding this call. As Meg mentioned, you've got some progressives on the Hill protesting now. Just saw them moments ago. They're saying that this could be characterized as the Biden administration needing to do more for Black voters, an extension of what we've seen with voting rights and also George Floyd Act. I mean, what message does this send to Black voters that this whole situation is occurring?
Well, I agree that we can do more. That's what I just said in the top of my statement. I'm calling on the Biden administration to do more. And I also know what the Supreme Court has said. But my position is simply this. Take the administrative action that needs to be taken. And I would much rather the next 4 or 5 years be spent with them stopping the Biden administration than for us to spend the next 4 or 5 years trying to, litigate to get it done. Let them litigate to get it undone.
Yeah, and then a follow-up on that is, in your conversations with the White House, have you communicated the political risk to all of this? Again, you're credited with saving Biden's campaign in the primary, galvanizing Black voters from the primary through the general election. Does the White House adequately understand the political risk here with a crucial part of its base?
Well, I suspect they may. I don't know. I've never talked to them about this on the basis of politics. I may this afternoon. I really hadn't really been focused on the politics of it. I'm more focused on keeping people in their homes. My second most important job these days is trying to get my arms around COVID-19, getting beyond COVID-19, and looking at what some of these corporations are doing in this instance and in other instances to circumvent the law. Because, you know, I have 3 passwords when it comes to COVID-19. Is this money being spent efficiently? Is it being spent effectively? And is it being spent equitably? And in this instance, it looks like all 3 are being violated. It ain't efficient, it's not effective, and certainly it's not equitable.
Okay, up next we have Rebecca Leibson. You may unmute and ask your question.
Thank you for your time, Congressman. Is there anything that can be done to help people who have already been evicted during COVID? This moratorium that's just expired did not protect everyone who was at risk of being evicted. And so there are people who are already being thrown out of their homes or who were thrown out of their homes weeks ago. Is there anything that this money can do for them or anything else Congress can do to help them out?
Well, I would ask, I would suggest that anybody that has been evicted and they feel it's been done so unfairly. One of the things I'm very proud of here in the state of South Carolina, we have an agency, a state agency. It's called the South Carolina Human Affairs Commission. I would say to those people, take your issue to the South Carolina Human Affairs Commission. I spent a little time there as well. And let them investigate as to whether or not you were treated fairly. On the other side of that coin, I'm going to be working, I think tomorrow, we will have a session with the treasurer. And I'm going to be asking questions as to whether or not this money is coming out of the Treasury Department. Whether or not something can be done about this $46 billion out there. Whether or not the Treasury Department will open an investigation to see exactly whether or not it's on the up and up that these states have not gotten the money out. Because a lot of people feel that this is some intention on the part of some states in order to get to a point that they might be able to apply to use the money to do something else rather than what we've done. Maybe this might have to go back to the Treasury. And I'm going to ask the Treasury whether or not it's possible. Just say to these states, if this money is not out the door in some time certain, it must be returned to the Treasury. You're not going to be able to use this money for anything else. That's the kind of thing I think I'm going to be pushing at the federal level.
Okay, does anyone else have any more questions? If so, you may use the chat function or use the raise hand function, and then I will call on you to unmute. Thomas, you may go ahead and ask your question.
Congressman, just one more question. Obviously you have close relationships with people in the Biden administration. Have you talked to them about this issue? Have you talked to your connections there? And what's kind of the feedback that you're hearing from the administration on extending the moratorium?
Well, I have talked to them. Last week before we left, I talked with the president's staffers. Last night, I talked with another one, and I may talk with some others today. Not may, I will, because I think that we should explore other possibilities. My dad used to tell me all the time, son, where there is a will, there is a way. And so what I'm trying to determine whether or not the extent of the willingness to do something. And if there is a will to do something, I think we ought to be able to find a way to do it.
All right, Joseph Bustos, you may go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Congressman Clyburn. A little off topic here. Your daughter, Jennifer Clyburn Reed, was nominated to be the federal co-chair of the Crescent Coalition. And I just wanted to get your reaction to that and how much of a role did you play in getting her nominated to that position?
Well, I think I played the same role that her mother played, and that is raising her to be a very competent person on her own. She went off and got 4 degrees, and is retired as an administrator at the University of South Carolina. She's highly qualified, and I know few people would believe this, but during the campaign last year, I found out by accident that she was playing a national role in that campaign. She never told me. And so the Biden administration and the folks in the Biden administration know her on a level that I don't. This Crescent, Southeast Crescent Regional Planning Commission is on the level, or it's the same as the so-called Appalachia. And of course, we have only 6 counties in South Carolina that are in the Appalachia Regional Commission, and the other 40 counties are none at all. I was the former Congressman Mike McIntyre from North Carolina, and I worked for years trying to get parts of North Carolina and South Carolina that's not in the Planning Commission into one because of our efforts on behalf of rural folks in North Carolina and South Carolina. And so we teamed up with legislators in Virginia, Florida, Georgia, and created this commission some 15 years ago. Now, this is not new for South Carolina. South Carolina was in the old Coastal Plains Regional Planning Commission. Now, I know I'm dating myself here, and this is stuff a lot of it are not aware of, but the Coastal Plains Regional Planning Commission, it existed during the Carter administration, was headquartered in Charleston. But for some reason, the Carter administration decided not to further fund it, and it was eliminated during the Reagan years. And I always thought that South Carolina got shortchanged by billions by being taken out of the Regional Planning Commission. And I think Jennifer, her background as an educator and a pretty good administrator, was a good choice. I'm very proud of her, as I am of all 3 of my daughters, and I'm sure she'll do okay.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Tony Rom, you may unmute and ask your question.
Hey, thank you so much for fitting me in here. And hey, Congressman, I hope
Hey,
you're
how are you?
well. I'm good, thanks. In the time that we have been talking here, the White House has put out a statement talking a little bit more about the eviction moratorium. It says it's taking action to call on local courts not to enforce and to call on states to adopt their own eviction moratoria. But it says here that it once again looked at the authorities, and the CDC found they don't have the legal authority to take action. So I'm just wondering, to the extent that you know about the new set of White House announcements today, if you think that's sufficient or if this is still far short of what's necessary. Thank you.
That's a significant another step. That's part of what my conversation was last night with people in the administration. I'm pleased to know that maybe somebody is listening, because I think it's good for states not to do this. We're trying to get beyond this pandemic, and all the science tell us that these kinds of evictions will contribute. This Delta variant ain't no plaything. You know, it's for real. And the numbers are there and they're clear. And we ought not be doing anything that could contribute to this variant taking us into a much worse place. It's already taken us to a bad place, and it can get worse. So I'm glad that the White House is calling upon state and local governments, and that's what I'm doing, calling upon the governor of South Carolina to ask the state of South Carolina, all of its entities, and ask the landlords in South Carolina, don't do this. There's $500 million sitting there in the state coffers that can go to you. Please don't put people on the street. You've got the wherewithal to access this money. And I think that procedures ought to be put in place for this money to be able to go directly to landlord. Any landlord that sees it necessary to file an eviction notice ought to make the state housing and finance authority aware of that. And maybe some mechanism ought to be put in place between that landlord and the sophisticated people in government to do this. You know, one of the reasons I'm so animated when it comes to the rural communities, because you know, here in South Carolina, we have a history of underfunding educational pursuits, especially in rural communities. That Abbeville case that went on for almost 30 years, which we thought we had a big victory with the Supreme Court, and all of a sudden that was not real anymore. That came about because of the intentional underfunding of educational systems in rural South Carolina. And so we have a lot of people who are not sophisticated at filling out these forms. We're not sophisticated at all of this at all. And they ought not be preyed upon by people who are much more sophisticated and who have got the wherewithal to access the money that's due them. And we ought to do that with some compassion for the people who need shelter over their heads.
Okay, well, that is it for all of our questions. Congressman, would you like to share any final thoughts?
I think I've said enough. Let me thank all of you for joining me here today. And on such short notice, but I've been agonizing all weekend about this because really, I stayed in Washington an additional 24 hours on Friday, trying to find a way to deal with this. But the courts are the courts. I don't always like the court rulings. And this is another one of those times when I think the Supreme Court is not doing justice to everybody in the land. Thank you.